So my brother reminded me of something, and the video that was suggested to me is that I talk about the time that my dad, Rick, destroyed my Game Boy. And what I want to say was that parenting styles has changed a lot, especially from where I was born and my brother was born. Like we're born mid to late '80s. And back then, kids were treated just like slaves, really, where it's almost like you can smack a child still, you can verbally abuse a child, you can be like, you know what, he will do this, he will do that. I know how my child thinks and other things like that, where it's just ultimately like digesting nonstop disrespect, really. And nowadays, there's a lot more chances, there's a lot more gentle parenting, and that is helpful and that is not helpful. And sometimes when it comes to good parenting, as they say, that sometimes you need to be harsh when it is a dangerous situation. Sometimes you need to be harsh when a child is doing a behavior that's not okay, not appropriate. We always have to gauge how we approach children. And there are some people with very busy lifestyles where their impatience gets in the way. And there is also, like, people with just frustrations. And then there's also that power dynamic when it comes to parents and children, where sometimes parents may have a, you're my child, I don't give a fuck, I'm going to do what I need to do to send a point home. So what happened was that I was in middle school, and this was like after September 11th. So I believe I was around 14 years old. So what happened was that my dad Rick was taking me, my brother, me and my two other brothers, like Christmas shopping and picking up a couple of things at Walmart in downtown Guilford. So the first thing was that my dad was upset with me because he asked me to find something and I wasn't able to find it because he was like saying, you should look at the aisles and other things like that as well, really. Sometimes, as I said, it's not that kids are stupid, it's just that sometimes people lack common sense, really. Sometimes, like, I did cooking last week, so my brother had explained to me the difference between cured and uncured meat. You're not you're not always brought up with everything, really, so with every piece of knowledge, really, even though some things may sound like common sense, really. So he was frustrated because of that. And then also too, I had a younger brother, and he would always like he was like 3 or 4 years old at the time, really, but he would always have tantrums. He would always being like very frustrating, hard to deal with, disrespectful. I remember like 2 or 3 weeks after we adopted him, when he was 0 years old. Rick, you know what? He just like took some ice cubes and he just slammed it in with my orange juice and splashed it all over me. It was like whoops, because he had that type of passive aggressive behavior. And the way Rick worked was he was that type of person where I'm the father, I can be the asshole to you. And what happened was that Rick wanted me to sign a Christmas card, and I'm not sure why I didn't do it or what was going on, really, why I didn't do it. But I was playing my Pokemon trading card game on my Game Boy. So Rick lost his patience, grabbed my Game Boy, and he slammed it against the wall, and the batteries flew out, and he was kind of like cursing in my face, and he's like, fucking there we go, whatever, really. And it did a lot of things for me. Like, first of all, I don't really respect Rick, and, the day he dies is going to be the happiest day of my life. And I've gone to therapy many, many times, and my therapist will always say, why don't you talk about Rick? Why don't you talk about Rick? I used to talk about my other father, but why don't you talk about Rick? And I'm changing their names, so, I'm a South Park fan, Rick and Garrison. Why don't you talk about Rick? But it was things like this that was one of the reasons why I don't talk about him. Because, as my brother would call it, a Rick moment, where Rick would just be violent or curse a lot, or just, always just, like take things to the extreme, really. And I even like remember telling my dad Garrison one day when he was driving me home from a planetarium, because Rick had a flip out before then, because what happened was I got he wanted to give me a $5 bill to buy food at McDonald's for a planetarium field trip. But what happened was the ATM only gave out a $20 bill. So he's like saying something like Rick was saying, Byron, if you spend any more than that $5, I'm gonna break your fucking hands. This $20 is gonna feed the family for the entire week. And I remember, and then also too, I think somebody cut him off in traffic, so he's like, Jesus fucking Christ, really. And I remember like Garrison took me home, and he was kind of like, why you're kind of upset, like you just want a field trip. Why is it that always, every single time you go somewhere special, you always walk away depressed? And I was kind of saying, a little bit of what I said, some things about Rick was saying, and I said, like, I think Rick needs to see a psychiatrist because he's always really, really angry. I remember my dad, Garrison, hit the brakes hard as he could. He says, like, you do not talk about your father like that. My parents are a gay couple, two dads. So he's like, you do not talk about your father like that. I'm the adult. You're the child. I can talk about your psychology, and if you need a therapist, all you want. You do not do that to an adult. And this is kind of like, what I've said in a prior video about what a lot of parents did back then, which was that they expect respect from the child, but they expect, tolerance when a parent's disrespectful. So that's also one of the issues with a lot of kids nowadays that suffers, because we were always taught that respect is one way. Parents can disrespect you, and kids have to show extreme respect, really. Now it's reverse, where parents have to be patient and children can be disrespectful. But, there's always a middle ground. And as I said, if you ever want to raise, good children that know how to respect people, children that want to have relationships, children who want to have good boundaries, you have to teach, balance on both sides. Sometimes, yes, we get upset, but you have to teach balance on both sides, really. So I remember the night got a little bit more disturbing. Like after Rick did that, I said something to my brother, like, Rick's just taking it out on me because he's mad at our younger brother. And then Rick, like, said something like, if you don't sign that fucking card, and if you don't mean it, I'm going to beat your fucking ass, really. I'm going to kick your ass to make sure you mean what you mean when you sign that Christmas card for your other father, really. And what happened was he misheard something that I said. Well, he thought that I said, I'll sign it, but I'm not going to mean it, really. That's not what I said. What I said was what I said to my brother was, this is just, how Rick is, really. He's mad at my little brother, and sometimes, he takes it out on us, really. He doesn't know how to discipline that kid. He doesn't know how to discipline, like, a 1-year-old. Then the other part of it was that, that with Rick, and this is one of the reasons why I just, always hated him, was because, even though he did nice things, he was a good person, he wasn't like an abusive father or whatever, ups and downs, really, but it was always like, I'm the adult, I can be angry, I can be aggressive, really. You have to sit and take it. And I know, like, some people have gone through way worse things than what I've been through. I've gone through just, maybe moderate or slight domestic violence. But I do think that, the important thing is that, I felt like, honestly, like, as I said, really, like, it's like he can turn up the violence and I can't, really. And I also want to say that I've been living with my brother for many years, and I kind of see how it goes with both of us. There may be days where we want to flip out on each other. There's days when my brother's upset, and then I kind of get tense because it kind of reminds me of my childhood of, oh, well, we know how we know how our parents were. They did not have that much emotional intelligence, really. So I see how that impacts my older brother. I see how that impacts me, really. And sometimes, when people smile at me, I have some PTSD where I may want to destroy shit and ruin everybody's day. Or when I did the 40-hour film project a few years ago, and I told people I was struggling with suicidal thoughts and depression, part of it coming from my family and some of the things they did to me, like my dad running for governor and doing a commercial, misaccurately talking about me and my brother's mental health issues and PTSD. I had no problem talking more and more about how these very painful moments inside of me influenced my writing. And I remember, like, being really graphic about PTSD and other details, but it was kind of almost like with how Rick was, where he didn't think about our feelings or how his anger and just jerk behavior had an impact on us. When he was mad, he was mad. And that's kind of what influenced me to almost thinking the same way, really, where it's like, if I'm upset, everybody has to hear it and everybody has to be understanding why I'm upset. But as you learn as you get older, if you behave like an asshole, you are an asshole. If you're going through a hard time or you're frustrated or you have a lot of pent up feelings and you behave like an asshole, you are an asshole. Because there's no excuse for that. The other part of it that I will say is also this as well, really, where also, my other father, Garrison, came home and he was like, why is Byron's Game Boy all over the floor? Why is the batteries all out? And then what my father Garrison did was he put me in a room and then he kind of blocked the door. And Rick was kind of mad, saying, no, don't talk to him, no, because what he didn't want me to do was say, we were working on a Christmas gift for you. So we talked about it, and I was saying some things like, and then also what Rick was saying before Garrison came home was he was saying things like, your fucking teachers are all a bunch of fucking liars. I want to kick their ass. They're all a bunch of fucking assholes, really. Because he was mad that me and my brother couldn't find things in the store, like learn how to read the signs, read where like things are down the aisles, read the aisle signs and figure out where shit is and stuff like that. But like I said before, and I'll say it again, that sometimes kids are stupid. Sometimes teenagers are stupid. Sometimes teenagers you may need to explain something simple to somebody. Like again, I clean hospital beds. I do discharge. There are people who can't make beds in hospital standards. It's not that fucking difficult. But I will not be like, oh well, I'm gonna kick this person's ass, that person's ass. Fuck this, fuck that. And I like what somebody said in another video that when you are a parent and you are very verbally abusive, or you're saying things like, oh well, you know what, your teacher didn't teach you right, I'm gonna kick your teacher's fucking ass, really. Always imagine to yourself, imagine if you did that at your job. How fast would you be in human resource? How fast would they call the cops on you, really? Talk to your kid the same way you talk to somebody at your job, really. If it's always just verbal abuse and disrespect, really, there's a reason why, I have a very crass style, really. So it's always important to just teach respect, really, and even in hard times, really, because you're also teaching your children how do you respond under pressure. And if the response is just anger, exploding, disrespect, hurting feelings, that's going to teach a kid, oh well, that's normal in all relationships, and that's normal whenever you want to get your way or dictate a mood or dictate something, is to be verbally abusive and whatever, really. But he did say that. But when I was talking to Garrison about what happened, really, I was honest, but I also said something like, you guys think I'm stupid, you think I'm retarded, I'm pathetic, I can't do anything right, really. And what Rick was saying was like, when they talked about it, he said, oh, well, Byron's a fucking liar, and other things like that. And that's not me lying about what he was saying. That's just how I felt, really. Because again, if you always have a dad, like I know I talked about the baptism video and where my father called me a fucking asshole for not remembering the names of people that I saw weeks before then. I remember another time my father said something like, Matt and Byron are stupid, they can't learn. And he was like laughing, really. Because again, you have kids with mental illness. Some people will do that where they're like, oh, well, you know what? I can call my kids stupid or retarded. I'm big. I'm 100 pounds bigger than them. I can knock their ass down if they do that. But again, it just doesn't. It's one of these reasons why these videos exist. Really, it's a way for me to get out my feelings. But ultimately, it's just like what I said. Really, ultimately, when you disrespect a child, when you disrespect your kids and make excuses for your behavior, even if you try to reconcile, it still harbors feelings. Like this was something that happened like almost 25 fucking years ago. But I remember it just like it happened like a few minutes ago. And I also remember, my dad did what me and Rick, we reconciled, but he did say something like, it's your fault. I'm from New York City. New York people are loud, really. And I also understand that Rick was a teacher in middle school for a couple of years in New York City. you gotta get loud to kind of get people's attentions. I also understand my parents worked, a lot of hours. They were managing a child. We moved a bunch of times at that time, and then we also separated. Like one of my dads lived in Connecticut for a while, my other dad lived in New York. They struggled financially. I remember one, and I also think that they just wanted me and my brother just to behave ourselves and just do the right thing, because they were at a point where they couldn't. They had to be more about making their careers go the way that they want their careers to go, and we almost had to raise each other and raise ourselves really. But also sometimes the way people do that is by being very harsh and strict really, because it's almost like being in the military, where it's almost like if you're always harsh and strict when people are around you, that may carry off when the leaders are not around. Or another thing that happens is people are like, well, you know what, I want to have my freedom, so I'm not gonna fuck up when you are not there really. But it also hurt me another way too when all this happened. Like it was bad because it was teaching me a bad lesson about adults. Because a lot of adults will do this: is that they'll make excuses for their behavior, and a lot of adults don't take accountability. I remember for the longest time in my life when I was in my 20s, I hung out with bad crowds of people. I had sex addiction. I had PTSD. I had antisocial behavior, and I lived in poverty, and I struggled a lot, and I made a bunch of really, really stupid choices. And I've always said, I was a product of my environment. When I got out of college, nobody helped me, and I was making less than $70 a week, and nobody helped me, so I almost like self-destructed. Everybody doesn't want the best out of me. I should just join in destroying myself, really. And when I did that, I made a lot of excuses for myself, and some of that does stem from how I was raised as a child, which was that when you get angry or when you flip the fuck out, really, people have to be understanding of why you're doing that, and that's the worst thing to do, because that does not hold you accountable for your behavior. And then if you're not accountable, you never ever ever grow. And one of the reasons why I feel maybe a lot of kids are misbehaving nowadays is because they also came from a generation of, and that happens with a lot of parents, of excuses or overlooking what they do wrong really. If you are verbally abusive to a child, if you make excuses for your own behavior, if you always are like, oh, that's not how it happened, or you remember things wrong, or you're mentally ill, so you remember things wrong, or it's a delusion, or I don't believe you. um, I don't expect people to remember every little thing. Some people can just let go of stuff. But it does get to a point, in my opinion, where it's almost like you're just teaching the next generation to do the exact same thing, which is cause problems. And when you cause problems or when you take things too far, you don't hold yourself accountable for how you take too far. You don't develop yourself. And that's kind of one of the issues that I've had with my parents too, where I felt like in this situation, yes, I was wrong for not doing what my dad said. Really, yes, I was wrong for getting my emotions and gaslighting and making it come off like my Charles said those hurtful things when it was stuff that I came up with because I was more upset that he was condescending and saying hurtful things about my teachers, like he wanted to kick their asses and they're all fucking assholes for not teaching me things like how to find stuff in the store. And then he also talked to me and said that he wanted me to react off of the things he was saying, really. And that's also one thing I hate about parents, is that some parents will do that. They want to get you mad because they want you to scream and yell out your feelings. But the problem is that I have a lot of dormant feelings. It's almost like, if I'm angry, I can be bloodthirsty. If I'm angry, I can say the worst words I know, even if it's, racial or whatever. Not because I'm a racist, because all that powerful, hateful language, really. And I remember, like, sometimes in high school, like, there's a skit that me and my girlfriend did that our teacher told us to do on domestic violence. And I remember flipping over tables and really just, nothing but curse words and threatening to put my hands on her. And some people were like, wow, where did this come from? I'm like, oh, well, that came from my father, really, because he would flip over tables. He would do, like, the hand on your shoulder, big hand towards you, like he wants to tease you, to smack you. Verbal abuse, putting people down, saying those hurtful words that you can, not racial slurs, but definitely, like, fucking asshole, or like you're stupid, can't learn other verbal abusive things really. So a lot of people kind of wonder, when I was in high school and middle school, a lot of people wonder where's all this pent up anger coming from. It was just how I was raised, but also how there was like a lot of overlooking my traumatic experiences and other things like that. So how we raise people is very very important. But also too, there are people like me who like when I travel, I don't have any souvenirs. I have my camera equipment, other things like that on the table, but I do not have souvenirs because sometimes I learned that's almost like you have something that you love and care about. Like I'm going to Memphis in a couple of weeks. I would like to give my brother a Memphis mug or myself a Memphis mug, or I can see myself getting one of those Woodstock mugs with a big smile on it. Sometimes I don't buy souvenirs because I'm always used to having something that I care about kind of ruined or fucked up by somebody else really because of that really. Or sometimes I know like really sad. Sometimes people would send me on my way really. Like if I go to a restaurant or if I see a friend really, that would make me. They would say, okay, bring some cookies, bring some food. And sometimes what I do is before I go into a house or whatever, I go back home, I throw it in the trash really. 'Cause I'm like, I don't want to feel happy. I don't want to have that joy really. Because once I go back to my regular life, it's gonna suck really. Or sometimes I used to be such a malcontent where I never won any trophies during track, but I always would say if I ever won a trophy, I would throw it in the trash. Or I remember like sometimes getting scholarships and I would throw the paperwork in the trash. I remember one time I told my dad, like when he moved out of the house, throw my degrees in throw my college degrees in the trash, and all that kind of stems from this really because it taught me why have something special for yourself if someone's gonna fuck it up really. Or sometimes I know when I have birthdays, my dad would always say like, okay, you have your last slice of birthday cake. Do you want that for dessert? I was like, no. Can you please throw that in the trash for me? My dad would say, well, that's really sad. But it kind of comes from that where it's almost like you have something special. Somebody loses their patience and fucks that up. Or one of the reasons why I don't celebrate my birthdays is because there's always fucking family drama and other shit about that goes on really. So how you behave really has an impact on a child really. Yes, people should get older, get wiser, forgive, and persevere and find their own happiness based on challenges that they got as a kid, really. And yeah, and part of it was my own behavior by not paying attention or being really sucked into my video games. But definitely how my father took things was worse, really. But I also learned too that, as my dad did say, play video games at nighttime, do other things at nighttime, really. And I also understand too that as I said, my family is, they do not like me saying this, but this is true. They're very, very selfish people. Very, very selfish people. So it's almost like, always like, either yelling or be like, do this, do that, do this, do that, get here, other things like that. Or, I know like, one time, my dad was like, I need you to go outside, check an extension cord. Or I remember like one time my dad was like, okay, you know what? It's snowing really bad, so I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. and I'm going to lock you guys outside until you guys are completely done shoveling, really. So, like I said, some parents have that mentality of children are just above slaves, really, where we can treat you whatever type of way, really, because sometimes that's how their parents brought them up, But it's important to be respectful and having patience with your kid because honestly, that's very, very important. And if you teach them, just disrespect and hurting feelings and, again, like breaking boundaries or ruining people's properties or just bullying to get your point across, they can grow up two ways. They can become a bigger bully. They can kind of have PTSD from domestic violence, or they can just kind of say, fuck relationship, fuck friends, fuck being like a family man. I want to just spend the rest of my life alone by myself. I'm happy to die by myself because I don't want to kind of be the same type of like hurtful person to my family. So how you treat your kids is very important to what type of person they develop into.